Hello, welcome to Bits and Biology. My name's Liz, and today I'm going to show you how to play the 1 to 2 player game Canopy. Canopy was designed by Tim Eitzner, has artwork by Vincent Dutray, and was published by Weird City Games in 2021. Let's go down to the table and I'll show you how to play Canopy. All right, here we are, nearly set up for a 2-player game of Canopy. Canopy is a game for 1 or 2 players in which you compete to grow the most bountiful rainforest full of tall trees, lush jungle plants, and diverse wildlife. Canopy is played over 3 seasons, otherwise known as rounds. Each season, players are going to take turns selecting cards to benefit their forest while trying to avoid threats. Before we look at how that works, let's first get set up for the 2-player game. For a standard game, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the advanced cards, and these are signified by a purple boxed number in the bottom right corner, either a 2 or a 3. The first thing you're going to do is place the season and growth cards in the center of the play area. These will say either new growth, 1, 2, or 3, current season, or season 2 or season 3. So there's 3 cards here that you'll place in the center of the play area. Next, you're going to place the point, wildlife, and tree tokens next to the play area. Shuffle the seed deck cards, place them face down next to the season 2-3 card. Shuffle the rainforest cards and randomly remove 10 of them and set them off to the side. In the rule book, it tells you to return them to the box, but you might need these, so I suggest just setting them off to the side in the play area. Next, you're going to separate the remaining rainforest cards into 3 roughly equal piles. If you're playing the standard game, these will be 34 cards each. You're going to place 1 pile face down next to where it says current season, 1 face down next to season 2, and 1 face down next to season 3. You'll deal 1 card from the current season deck to new growth area 3. This will form a pile here. We'll deal 2 cards from the current season deck to new growth area 2, and 3 cards from the current season deck to new growth area 3. So we've now made 3 piles of cards. Each player will then take a starting trunk card, which you can tell because it is purple and blue on the back side of those. And then lastly, you'll choose the first player. So now we're all set up. Like I said, Canopy is played over 3 seasons. Each season, players are going to take turns selecting cards for their forest by choosing 1 of the 3 new growth piles. They'll start with new growth pile 1, take a look at the card or cards, and decide whether or not they want to add those to their forest. If they decide to add those to their forest, they would bring them into their play area. We'll take a look at how each card plays here in a moment. I'm going to add that to this tree for the moment. Once they decide on a pile to take, they would then take a card from the current season deck and add it to that now empty space to replenish that pile. Then play would go to the next player. They would do the same thing. Starting with new growth pile 1, they would look at it, decide if they wanted to keep it. If they don't, they would put it back face down, add a card from the current season deck to that pile, and move on to the next pile and take a look at that. If they decided to keep it, they would add it to their play area. If not, they would put it back face down and add a card from the current season deck to the top of that pile. Then they would go to new growth pile 3, decide whether or not they want to keep those cards. If they do, they would add those to their play area, and then, as before, add a card to replenish that pile. Once you pass on a pile, you may not return to it that turn. Instead, you'd have to repeat that process with the next new growth pile. So once, for instance, you've passed on pile 1 and gone to pile 2, you can't then go back and decide you want pile 1. You can only go forward. If you pass on pile 3, you would then draw 1 card off of the current season deck and add that to your play area, and you don't have a choice. You can't reject that card. So for instance, even though this is not a great card, it would have to be added to your play area. You are looking for plants and animals that are going to benefit your forest the most, but as you can see here, there are also threats, and these come in the form of fire, disease, and drought. At the end of each season, players are going to score points for collecting sets of plants, completing trees, and growing the tallest tree. At the end of the third season, the player with the most points will be the winner. Let's take a look at some of the cards you can add to your forest and how those get added. So the first one that I want to talk about are trunks and canopies. So trunks can either be used to add to an existing tree, like so, or it can be used to start a new tree. So maybe we want to start a new tree over here and add to a forest here. As you can see, they're worth either 0, 1, or 2 points, and those will score whenever you score a completed tree at the end of a season. There are also canopy cards. These get added to existing uncompleted trees. So let's say this one were a little bit taller, and we add a canopy here. Canopies will be worth points at the end of the season that are a multiple of however many trunks you have. So this one is worth 0 times however many trunks you have, so not great. This one is worth 1 point times however many trunks you have, and they might be worth 2 points times however many trunks you have. If you draw a canopy card and you have an uncompleted tree, you have to add it. There is no choice in the matter. You can't discard a canopy if you have an open trunk. The other types of cards that you might get are wildlife cards, and those come in 2 different types. So for each type of wildlife, for each species, there are 2 different types of cards. One that will show 2 different numbers. These are the points you get at the end of the game for having either one of that species or both copies of that species. The other type of wildlife card is one that has text on it. So for instance, this emerald tree boa says once per season you may take 1 card from a pile that you pass. However, at the end of the game, it will be worth -1 point. Let's take a look at the wildlife cards really quick. There's only 6 of them in the standard game. This is the kinkajou. It says once per season, keep 1 extra card when you draw from the seed deck, and that'll be worth 2 points at the end of the game. And here is the companion card to the other kinkajou card. So these with the text on them are active wildlife cards, and these are called mating pairs. And again, they score depending on whether you have 1 copy of that species or both copies of it. Leaf cutter ants, once per season, you may discard 1 card from your forest. We have poison dart frogs, once per season. Before your turn, you may add 1 card to each pile, so that's each of these new growth piles, and that's worth 2 points at the end of the game. And for scoring these at the end of the game, even if you have, so for instance, this kinkajou is worth 2 points at the end of the game, and if you have both cards, both kinkajou cards, you would also get the 5 points for the mated pair, so those score separately. We also have a sloth, once per season. If you pass all piles, draw 1 extra card from the season deck, worth 2 points at the end of the game. And this toucan, once per season, before your turn, you may peek at 1 pile. That's quite useful, worth 1 point at the end of the game. So wildlife can give you abilities during the game, but does not score until after the 3rd round. So when you run across these in the new growth decks, they just get added to your play area, and if they have these season effects, you can activate those, usually once per season. So again, these would be added to your play area when you draw them from the new growth piles, but again, they don't score until the end of the game. Plants, on the other hand, these count for points at the end of the season. And so you can see here we have 3 different types in the standard deck. We have bromelia. These score at the end of the season. If you have 1 bromelia, then you score 2 points. 2 of them will get you 7 points, but if you were unlucky enough to get 3 or more of them, you would actually score -3 points at the end of the season. And again, these are added to your play area when you draw them from the new growth piles. Ferns will score depending on how many you have. If you have just 1, it's worth 2 points. If you're unlucky to have 2, you would score 0 points. 3 would score you 6 points, and so on. And then the Montserrat, 1 or 2 of them won't score you any points, but if you manage to get at least 3, you would score 8 points. We also have weather cards. Again, these are all added to your play area when you draw them from the new growth piles. So rain and sun will only score if you manage to get a pair of them. So 2 rain cards will score you nothing, but if we have a sun card here and a rain card together at the end of a season, those would score you 5 points, but individually they're not worth anything. And then we come to the threat cards, which come in the form of drought, fire, and disease. So if you draw a drought card when you draw a new growth pile into your play area, you must immediately discard 1 card of your choice. And this can be any card in your play area, including trunks and canopies, unless that tree has already been scored, and that would be signified by the fact that it has a wildlife token on it. Those cannot be affected by card effects, but any other card in your play area is fair game. Even other threat cards can be discarded using the drought card. Once you discard a card, you would then also discard that drought card. Fire and disease work in similar ways. If you have 2 fire, at the end of the season, you would have to discard 2 plants from your play area. If you have 3, then this fire spreads and it affects both players. And so each player would have to discard 1 plant card of their choice. That could come in useful. For instance, if you had 2 ferns, you could discard 1 of them and get your 2 points instead of 0. Or if you have 3 or more bromelia, maybe you can discard 1 of those to recover points. Disease works similarly to fire. If you have 2 in your play area at the end of the season, you will discard 2 wildlife cards of your choice from your play area. If you have 3, however, the disease spreads, and each player would then discard 1 wildlife card from their play area, 1 wildlife card of their choice. So that's how disease and fire and drought work. So now we have taken a look at all the different types of cards. Let's take a look at how a season ends. Right, so this is what our play areas might look like at the end of the season. Let's say it is this player's turn on the right. They would look at, so notice that we are out of current season cards. The deck has run out. And so once the deck has run out, players must choose from the new growth piles. There's no longer the option to pass on the 3rd growth pile once you've looked at it, because there are no current season cards to draw from. So this player would look at new growth 1, decide whether they want to take it. It's got 2 seed cards. I haven't talked about these yet. I will. So they're going to take these and put them in their player area. And then it goes over to the next person. They no longer have a new growth pile 1 to look at, so they're going to start with new growth pile 2. And let's say they look at that and decide that they want to take it. It has a seed card. That's really nice. Gives them a bromelia. So they're going to take that, add these to their play area, and then it comes over to this player. They have to take this new growth 3 pile. They don't have an option. It's all that is left. So they'll take that, gives them a 3rd disease card. They don't have an option to not take that. And now let's see how end of season actions and scoring work. So both players are going to follow the steps in sequence, gaining point tokens when they score. And then for each step, the player who took the last new growth pile is going to resolve their actions first. So in the case of our example, that would be this player over here on the right would resolve their actions first. The first thing they're going to do is look at their wildlife and activate any end of season wildlife effects. Now in the standard game, none of the wildlife have end of season effects. That's only in the advanced game. So then we would move on to step 2 and see if we had any seed cards. And so this player does. They have 2 seed cards, so that if they have 1 or more seed cards, they're going to draw 3 cards from the seed deck, and then they'll draw 1 extra card for each fire card that they have. So they have 1 fire card, so they'll draw 1 extra card. And then they will keep cards equal to the number of seed cards that they have. So they have 2 seed cards, so they're going to look at these cards and keep 2 of them. Now they don't have to keep 2 of them, but they can keep up to 2 of them. And so this rain card does them no good, so they'll discard that. The bromelia would actually give them negative points because they already have 2. This would give them a third one, so they'll discard that. They will keep both of these trunk cards, and so they can either add these both to this existing tree, or they could even start new trees with those trunk cards. So they're going to add those to that existing tree, and then these seed cards would get discarded. Now we come over to this player to see if they have any seed cards, and indeed they do. They have 1, so that lets them draw 3 cards from the seed deck. They'll draw an extra card for each fire card that they have. They have 3 fire cards, so they would draw 3 extra cards from the seed deck. They only have 1 seed card, so they only get to keep 1 of these. The bromelia gets them 2 points. They don't have any place to put a canopy. They could start a new tree with that trunk, but it's worth 0 points, so that's not great. Monstera doesn't give them any extra points, so they'll discard that. However, they have 2 ferns, and this would give them a 3rd fern, so they're going to keep that one and discard the rest of these. All right, once we have resolved seed cards, the next thing we do is resolve threats. And so again, since this player over here on the right took the last new growth pile, they would go first. So they'll look, and they only have 1 fire card. It takes at least 2 to have any repercussions from this card, so that just gets discarded. However, they have 3 disease cards, and so 3 disease cards means that the disease has spread and that each player will have to discard 1 wildlife card. So they would choose, for instance, maybe they're going to discard this sloth card, and then this player over here would also have to discard a wildlife card if they have one, and so they're going to discard this poison dart frog. And then these disease cards will then get discarded. So now we have resolved threats. Remember the other threat, the drought cards, those get resolved right when they get drawn. So those don't come into play at the end of the round. Next, we're going to score trees. So for previously unscored and completed trees, we're going to score points for each tree with a canopy. First, we're going to score the trunk cards. So this player over here has 1 completed tree that is worth 5 points for its trunks. Now they do have this uncompleted tree, but they won't score it because it doesn't yet have a canopy. So they get 5 points for their trunks. They would take the 5-point marker and add that to their play area. And then each canopy is going to award a number of points for each trunk in that tree. So this one, for instance, says 1 times the number of trunks. There are 4 trunks in this tree, so this player would get 4 points for that. Once a tree is scored, you're going to take a wildlife token, it doesn't matter which one, and place that on the tree to show that it has already been scored. And then we'll come over here to the other player. They unfortunately, for both their completed trees, do not get any points for their trunks. The trunks don't have any point values on them that score them points. So then we move to canopies. Well, this completed tree here doesn't score them any points because it says 0 times the number of trunks. So 0 times anything is 0, so no points for that tree. This one, however, says 2 points per trunk in that tree, so they would get 2 points for that. Next, the player with the tallest completed tree is going to get the tallest tree award for that season. So starting with the 3-point completed tree token, the tallest tree would gain this. So this is our tallest tree over here, so you would put that completed tree token, tallest completed tree token on that tree right there, and that'll score points at the end of the game. In Season 2, the tallest completed tree is worth 4 points, and in Season 3, the tallest completed tree is worth 5 points. Trees from previous seasons are eligible if they have not already won the award. Even if they have a wildlife token on them, if they have not already won a tallest tree award, they're still eligible for that award at the end of the next season. Trees that have been scored cannot be affected by cards in subsequent rounds, but like I said, they can win the tallest tree award if they've not previously won it. And they are used at the end of the game when determining who has the largest forest. Next to score would be points for any plants or weather cards that you have in your forest. So again, the player who took the last new growth pile will score first. This player has, for plants, they have 2 bromelias, so that's worth 7 points. And these get discarded at the end of the season. We're going to wait until everybody has scored. This fern is worth 2 points for a single fern, so they get those points. And then they have 2 rain and a sun. These only score in pairs of sun and rain. So a pair of rain and sun cards will give 5 points. For this player over here, they have 3 ferns. That's 6 points. They have 4 monstera. That's going to give them 8 more points. So we're up to 14, and they don't get any points for their rain card because they don't have a sun card to go along with it, so they get 14 points for their plants. Once we have taken care of any end-of-season wildlife effects, drawn cards for the seeds, taken care of threat cards, and scored the trees and plants and weather, now it's time for cleanup, and we're going to discard all cards except for not trees and wildlife. So all of these threat cards and all of the plants and weather cards will then be discarded. At the end of seasons 1 or 2, we would then take the next season deck, so in this case the season 2 deck, and put it in the current season area over here. From the new current season deck, we would then deal 1 card into new growth area 1, 2 cards for the new growth 2 pile, and 3 cards into the new growth 3 pile. The player with the fewest total points is going to be the first player in the new season. So you would see who has the fewest total points, and that's quite easily this player over here on the left. Unfortunately for them, but it does mean that they get to go first. If there is a tie for points at the start going into a season, the player who took the last card in the previous season will be the one that goes first. Note that because wildlife don't score until the end of the game, they're not going to factor into the point calculation when determining who goes first. So then at the end of the 3rd season, after you've done your regular season scoring, so let's say, we're at the end of the 3rd season, pretend there's a whole bunch of cards out here that we would be scoring. We're out of cards. The new growth piles have all been taken. At the end of season 3, you'll go through the scoring just as we did at the end of seasons 1 and season 2. And then at the end of the 3rd season, we would score first the active wildlife, which would score the points shown on the card. So for instance, with this emerald tree boa, the active wildlife is -1. We come over here to the kinkajou. The active card scores 2, the toucan scores 1, so they would get 3 points for their active wildlife. And then you would score mating pairs. And so for this pair of emerald tree boas, that's worth 5 points. And for this pair of kinkajous, also worth 5 points. So a mating pair is always worth 5 points. If instead this player only had the 1 kinkajou card, they would get 2 points for that. And then finally, you're going to score for who has the largest forest. For that, you're only going to count completed trees. So in this case, this person has 2 completed trees, this person only has 1. So this player here on the left would get the token for the largest completed forest. Now again, at the end of an actual game, there would be many more trees and more wildlife in each player's area. And then once you have tallied up all the points, the player with the most points will be the winner. If there is a tie, the player with the most wildlife would be the winner. If there's still a tie, the players would share the victory. So there are several variants to the the solo and the 2-player game that you can use, and these have to do with the advanced cards. So you can play with plants and threats only. So for threats, we have blight and lightning. For plants, we have pitcher plant, coin cap fungi, and I think that's it for plant. Oh no, whoops. We also have orchids and lianas. So that's for the plants. So if you played with the plants and threats variant, those are the cards that you would add to the standard deck. You can play with a wildlife only variant where you would remove the standard wildlife from the standard deck, so emerald tree boa, leaf cutter ants, kinkajou, toucan, and so on, you would set those aside and add in the advanced wildlife, and there's 7 of those. So you would add in those. You can play with plants, threats, and wildlife by removing the standard wildlife from the deck and adding in all of the advanced cards to the deck, the plants, threats, and wildlife. Or you can play with a wildlife mix. And so you would add advanced plant and threat cards to the deck and then choose at random from all of the wildlife in the standard and advanced deck, choose 6 or 7 of those to add in to your deck. Now, from a Board Game Geek forum post response, the designer says that there's actually no problem if you want to add in all of the wildlife cards. It just will increase the complexity of the game as well as the game length. That's entirely up to you, but it has been play tested and it's finely balanced. There is also the shifting season variant. This can't be used in the solo game. So all of those other variants can be used in the solo game, but not the shifting season variant. So you would take these shifting season cards, shuffle these up at the start of the game, place them face down near the play area, and then at the start of each season, you would reveal one of these cards. So for instance, this says Season of Hunting. At the end of the season, before scoring, each player must choose to discard 1 wildlife card at random or lose 4 points. And so these would affect all players. Now let's take a look at how we play the solo game. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. All right, in the solo game, you are playing against the forest spirit. You are going to follow standard setup rules. However, neither the solo player nor the forest spirit will gain a starting trunk. For an easier game, the solo player can start with a starting trunk. For a harder game, the forest spirit can start with a starting trunk. If you are playing with the advanced cards, you're going to remove all of the lightning, fungi, and pitcher plant cards from the game. These don't get used in the solo game. At the start of each season, including season 1, you will give the forest spirit 1 starting trunk. So at the start of every season, including season 1. And so we did that. It started with one of these, this one. This one was a starting trunk card. And then the solo player will take the first turn each season, and turns will go back and forth just like they do in a multiplayer game. And you will take your turns as normal, adding cards to your forest. When you pass a pile, you'll return any threat cards that were in that pile face up, like you can see I've done here. When we get to the end of the season, we're going to resolve each step for our forest before the forest spirit resolves their steps. So as we go through the 6 steps that occur at the end of each season, as the solo player, we will resolve our steps before the forest spirit does. Now let's talk about, and the reason I have this set up, let's talk about what happens on the forest spirit's turn. So on the forest spirit's turn, it's going to follow particular steps when selecting a new growth pile. And there are actually 2 handy player references for the solo game. One has a solo turn reference, and that has both the solo player's turn and the forest spirit's turn. And then the other one has some changes to cards in the solo game. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as we go through the forest spirit's turn, it is going to select the new growth pile with the most face down cards. So if we take a look at this, we can see that new growth pile 2 has 3 face down cards. And new growth pile 3 also has 3 face down cards. If 2 piles are tied, it's going to take the pile with the fewest face-up cards. Well, both of these have 1 face-up card. So now we go to the next point in the decision tree. So because those piles are still tied, they both have the same number of face-down cards, they both have 1 face-up threat card, then it's going to take the pile of those 2, it's going to take the pile furthest to the left. In this case, that is new growth pile 2. The first thing we're going to do is take a card from the current season deck and place it on new growth pile 1 because it skipped that pile. So we're going to add a card just like we do when we take our turn. We're going to add a card to whichever growth piles are skipped. So it took new growth pile 2. Then we're going to take first we are going to add a card to replenish the cards that were taken from new growth pile 2. Now we're going to look at the cards that were taken. And we see that there is a face down threat card. So remember, the fire card was face up, but this drought card was face down. Whenever it gains a face down threat card, it's going to take a card from the current season deck and add a card to new growth pile 3. All right, now we can make some decisions about what to do with these cards. First of all, the fire card is just going to get added here. We'll talk about what happens with these threat cards here in a moment. We are first going to take a look for trunks. And so it does have one trunk. We have a canopy, a trunk, and our drought cards. So for trunks, if the spirit has one or none, 1 or 0 unfinished trees, it's going to start a new tree. Well, it has 2 unfinished trees, so it will not start a new tree. If I have a tree as a solo player, if I have a tree that has not won an award that is taller than any of the spirit's trees, it's going to add a new trunk to its tallest unfinished tree. So now we have to compare. We see that this finished tree here is 4 tall, including the canopy. We have one that is 5 tall, including the canopy. So it's actually going to add this trunk to its tallest unfinished tree. If that had not been the case, if I had not had a tree that was taller than any of its unfinished trees, then it would have added that trunk to its shortest unfinished tree. So it would have added it over here. And if all other points are equal, if there are still decisions to be made, the forest spirit will take into account awards for tallest tree or largest forest in how it chooses to complete a tree if all of those other points are equal. Now we come to the canopy. Canopies are always added to the tallest unfinished tree. So here they have one that is 3 trunks tall, so the canopy will be added to this tree here. And then the general rule for other cards is to always choose the option that will gain the forest spirit the most points or lose it the fewest points. And if those 2 options are tied, then we get to choose. So it has a drought card, which means that it does have to discard a card from its forest. And when we look at cards it could lose, we'll talk about why in a minute, but it's not going to lose any of its threat cards because right now it has more than we do. The fern card is worth 2 points. This monstera card is worth 0 points, so it might discard that one. It right now has a pair of weather cards, which are going to score at 5 points. The sloth and the toucan are both worth points to the forest spirit, and the seed card will let it draw cards, so is potentially worth points. This trunk here is not worth any points and could be discarded. However, it has the potential to be worth points as we build onto it. It could gain an award for the tallest tree, or it could help when determining who has the largest forest at the end of the game. And so the card that will lose it the least points is going to be discarding monstera. So we will discard that one. And we also discard the drought card. So then it comes over to the solo player's turn. I'm going to look at new growth pile 1. And I like what I see. It doesn't have any threat cards. And so I'm going to put these cards into my forest over here. Now we come over to the forest spirit, and again it's going to take the stack that has the most face down cards. In that case we have 4 cards in new growth pile 3, so it will take new growth pile 3. There are no cards in the current season deck to add to new growth pile 1 or new growth pile 2. It skipped those. Normally a card would be added, but we can't do that right now. We also cannot replenish new growth pile 3, so we don't, just like in the multiplayer game. So now let's take a look at what cards it got. It did get a couple of trunks, so it does have just 1 unfinished tree, so it's going to start a new tree. And now with this second trunk, it has 2 unfinished trees, so it's going to add to its shortest tree. And because there is a tie there, I get to choose, and I'm just going to add it to the sort of next in line. Now we look at the other cards that it has. There's no canopy, but if it did have a canopy, it would go on this unfinished tree right here since it is the tallest. And it does have a disease card that gets added right here. And then it has a bromelia and a toucan, so those just get added to its forest. Then it's my turn. I'm going to take new growth pile 2. I don't have any choice. I have to take that pile. And it has a canopy, so I have to finish my tree there. I have no choice in the matter. So now we are at the end of the season. So I'm just going to have this end of season reference out here. So first of all, we activate any end of season effects. I will always do that first before the Forest Spirit, regardless of who takes the last new growth pile. We're not playing with the advanced cards, so there are no wildlife with any end of season effects. Next, we come to seeds. I do have a seed card and I have 2 fire cards. So I draw 3 cards for my seed card plus 2 extra for my 2 fire cards, and I will choose which ones to keep. Well, actually, I can only keep 1. I have 1 seed card, so I choose one of these to keep. So I'm going to take the fern, and then I discard my seed card. Now we come over here to the Forest Spirit. They also have a seed card, so they're going to draw 3 cards, and then they have 2 forest cards, so they're going to draw 2 extra cards for the forest cards. They have 1 seed card, so they can keep 1 of these. The bromelia gains them 4 points. The rain gains them nothing. The trunk doesn't gain them any immediate points, although, well, it will gain them 2 for sure and could go towards awards. Sun isn't going to gain them anything, and then we have another trunk. So the card that's going to immediately earn them the most points is going to be the bromelia, so they will add that to their forest. Next, we have threats. So first of all, before we talk about losing cards for threats, let's talk about the threat bonus that the Forest Spirit gets. At the end of each season, if the Forest Spirit has more threat cards than the solo player, it is going to gain 7 points. So in this case, I have 2 threat cards. The Forest Spirit has 4 threat cards. And so they will gain 7 points because they have the most threat cards. So we come over here. I have 2 fire cards, so I have to get rid of 2 plants. I'll just discard my 2 ferns. I lose 2 points altogether. Then we come over here to the Forest Spirit. They also have 2 fire cards, so they lose 2 plant cards. The fern card gets them 2 points. One of these bromelia gets them 4. Together they get 7, but if I discard a bromelia and a fern, that would only lose them a total of 6 points. Although I guess I could discard a trunk. It's worth 2. But potentially this gives them the largest forest. Right now, it goes towards the largest forest bonus at the end of the game, and they always take that into effect. So we're going to discard these 2 plant cards right here. And that's their 2 forest cards. They also have 2 disease cards, and so they're going to discard 2 animal cards. And what will lose them the least points is going to be discarding the sloth and the toucan. So that'll lose them 3. It really loses them 6 points altogether because they're giving up the pair, but they don't really have a choice. So that's that. Then we come down to trees. We're going to score completed trees and mark those with a wildlife token. We do the solo player first. I have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 worth of trunks. And then I have 1 times for both of my canopies. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total trunks. So that's another 7 points. Then we come over here to the Forest Spirit. They have 2, 3, 4, 5. They have 5 points for the trunks, and then if we look at their canopies, this is 3 points and this is another 6 points, so that's 9 points altogether. We'll just put in 1 and take out 10. So that is for the trees, and then we're going to award the tallest tree bonus. Well, I have the tallest tree, so I get the tallest tree bonus. Let's not forget to put wildlife tokens on our completed trees so that we know which ones have already been scored. Plants and weather, so we score all the plant and weather cards. I get 0 for my monstera. I get 7 points for my bromelia. And they get 2 points for their bromelia. And then they also we score the weather. They get 5 points for their sun and rain. And then we make sure that I've been discarding them as I go, but we discard all cards except for trees and wildlife. That should be the only thing left. I forgot to discard that seed card. So there we have it. We have done what happens at the end of the season for the solo game. When we get to the end of the game, when we're scoring wildlife, active wildlife, I should say, because that Forest Spirit did have an active wildlife before we discarded it. Where'd it go? This toucan. So it had a toucan and a sloth, but active wildlife actually poses no benefit for the Forest Spirit. So they don't get to do the action on the active wildlife card. However, when they score points at the end of the game for wildlife, they're going to score double points. So this toucan, where it would be worth 2 points to a solo player, it would be worth 4 points to the forest spirit. Any negative points from wildlife, so for instance, if they had the emerald tree boa, which gives -1 point, those are not scored for the forest spirit, so they don't get negative points for wildlife. And that is how you play the solo game of Canopy. Like I said, it has really nice solo player aids, also has good multiplayer aids, so that's great. The rulebook also does have 3 and 4 player rules. I'll let you find those on your own. I'm not going to go through them. I do suggest that you go through the 2-player game, or at least the solo game, before you venture into the 3 and 4 player rules. Anyway, that is all I have for you for this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!